Welcome to Breaking History. My name's Sean Morgan. I'm a host over at AMP News, and this show is all about unpacking the breaking news through the context of suppressed history. We're here with our resident historian, Matt Ehret, the editor of the Canadian Patriot Review. So, Matt, really interesting news this week. Two interesting things. One is in the Canadian Parliament, they're honoring Nazis, trying to twist the past as if they were some kind of war heroes fighting the Soviets. And at the same time, Zelensky is honoring Marina Abramovich, the Satanist, as an ambassador to Ukraine for some kind of children's program. So let's talk about this thing. Is this a new thing in Canada, or has this been done before?
Yeah, I guess first up, I gotta say, if anybody was a little bit confused about which side of history they should be on, that confusion should be completely eliminated at this point. The Satanists and the Nazis are really like doubling down in brotherly love and showcasing their true face. I mean, any pretense of being on the side of angels has really gone out the window. So as you pointed out, yes, Zelensky just appointed Maria Abramovich, leading witch, Satanist, high priestess, guru of the deep state, and poor sacrificial freaks like Lady Gaga, who see this woman as her personal guru, spirit cooker. She is now appointed ambassador for children's health in Ukraine. And then you have, at the same time, in the same breath, as you just pointed out, the entire Canadian Parliament brought together for a ceremony honoring a particular World War II veteran. And we all love World War II veterans, but not all World War II veterans are created equal. Because this particular scandal, I mean, I'm sure everybody knows about this, was erupted when this Ukrainian fighter in World War II, Yaroslav Hunka, was discovered to have been an SS Galicia division Nazi that was honored by everybody when Zelensky came to Canada. And you know, you have a picture of Zelensky and Chrystia Freeland and Trudeau all together, but the whole parliament is getting up in arms. Apparently, this guy came on the invitation of the Speaker of the House, who had to resign yesterday afternoon in embarrassment. And in the course of the speech, in the speech that the Speaker of the House gave honoring this guy, who, by the way, this guy met with Justin Trudeau in his personal office. They had forenotice. They knew exactly who this guy was. In the speech in Parliament, the Speaker actually said, this man fought in World War II against the Russians. So they didn't even make an allusion to the idea that he was fighting against the Nazis or fighting for freedom. It was fighting, he said it in the speech, fighting against the Russians. Which means if you're in World War II and you're fighting against the Russians, you know what side of the war you're on. So all that to say, this has become a really healthy scandal because Trudeau has been plastering this branding that anybody opposing his policies, which is the Davos World Economic Forum depopulation policies, is a Nazi. Whether you're a trucker standing up for your freedom, whether you're somebody who is vax hesitant, you are a Nazi. And he's thrown this stuff around wildly. But now that you're actually acting like a Nazi, destroying people's lives and freedoms for simply questioning the government or honoring Nazis directly, literal Nazis, all of a sudden, now you're embarrassed. And Justin came out with this speech, or this very lame apology, saying this is Putin propaganda.
Yeah, right. Anything that embarrasses them is Putin propaganda. And Bioclandestine shared this great meme right here, where you just have this contradiction. Like you pointed out, they're so anti-Nazi until it comes to the war in Ukraine, and then they're pro-Nazi. But this could be a good thing. This kind of cognitive dissonance could make people wake up. What do you think? Do you think that this is an opportunity to wake people up, or do you think we need something way bigger?
Well, I mean, the bad guys never let a good crisis go to waste. I don't think we should let a good scandal go to waste either. And I mean, I think that this is an opportunity to speak about things that were supposed to be unspeakable. And I think that the righteous indignation felt across both Canada but also the world. I mean, the world is watching this complete, devastatingly embarrassing hubris that I think that the oligarchy managing the narratives has gotten a little bit too secure with the power of their propaganda. And I mean, so what I'm about to say is going to touch on what I didn't say and I should have said regarding our opening remarks, which was, did this come out of nowhere? What's the historic roots? Now, of course, this didn't come out of nowhere. There are historic roots. And it has been a little bit too normalized. I mean, many of the Ukrainians who actually fought in World War II were fighting on the side of the Allies. They were fighting with the Russian army or in the Russian army against the Nazis. But you did have a large contingent, especially of this Galicia division, that had their own view of an ethnically pure Ukraine. These are people who, I mean, there are upwards of 30,000 volunteers who collaborated directly with the Nazis, killing Poles, Slavs, Jews throughout World War II. These were people who were largely the followers of people like Stefan Bandera, and a whole mythology was created for them, almost like a religion of a back to nature, and this idea that they are the pure heirs of they were the pure bloods, the pure Viking.
It is the same mythology that the Nazis in Germany had, right? They were the Ubermenschen.
It's not that different. Little variations on a theme. The Finnish, the Finland Nazi collaborators as well. Finland was also in a war against Russia during World War II, under Mannerheim, Carl Gustav Mannerheim, who was the head of the army. They also had their own Greater Finland ethnically pure ideology, that they were the pure race. And thus everybody was in agreement that there was a blood and soil like religion that had endowed their particular ethnically pure people, whatever that even means, ethnically pure. I mean, it's, you're dealing with thousands of years of intermarrying, but whatever. They all have their own religion.
But they're actually killing people that are of their own race.
If you don't want to get out of my country, that God granted my people of my pure race, then we are legitimately ordained with the right to kill you in any way possible, torture and kill, which is what happened to 90 to 100,000 Poles, Slavs, others. This is the reason why a lot of Ukrainians were okay since 2014, massacring upwards of 14,000 of their own fellow Ukrainians on the east of Ukraine when there was a constant civil war from 2014 to the Russian Special Military Operation, the SMO. 14,000, mostly civilians, were massacred, and those who were carrying it out were the second, third, and even fourth generation Nazis in Ukraine who had been groomed and cultivated by the CIA, by MI6 since World War II. Many of those leading killers were not punished at Nuremberg, but were brought out of Ukraine or remained there and became part of NATO's secret armies. I mean, we had something like 16 different high-level Nazis after World War II ran multiple departments of NATO, including the Central and Eastern European branch of NATO command centers, which was all done with the idea that everything that involves fighting Russians is thus justifiable. Even killer fascist Nazis is justifiable, but not just working with them, but employing them to manage things like Reinhard Gehlen, Hitler's top intelligence chief, became in charge of West German intelligence. He founded the Bundeswehr, today's German intelligence agency. That was Reinhard Gehlen, and his entire network of thousands of Nazis were reconstructed. Bandera, who was a leading killer and today a celebrated hero of Ukraine. He was made a hero of Ukraine in 2004 after the first George Soros funded color revolution brought in a Western puppet regime, and they immediately made Bandera a hero who has been remade a hero once more with the Maidan, the U.S. launched and organized Maidan of 2014. Now, Bandera he was brought into Germany. So was Mykola Lebed, both of whom were head leaders of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. That was the fascist army in Ukraine working with the Nazis. They were both brought in to work with Reinhard Gehlen in Germany. And in the case of Mykola Lebed, he was employed by the CIA. He died in the late 80s. and he was employed specifically to rewrite history for the Ukrainians, which became taught in all Ukrainian schools. It basically made World War II appear as though the real bad guys were the Russians and the Nazis weren't so bad. And this is where today you have statues erected of Stefan Bandera and Mykola Lebed, streets named after them, celebrations, as these creatures are begging, their followers are begging to get into NATO, which again was run by Nazis for much of.
So who really won World War II if the Nazis and their talent, so to speak, rises to the ranks of leadership? And how about in Italy and Japan and different places? Were the fascists able to keep their seats of power?
Yeah, unfortunately. In the case of Italy, you had what was known as Operation Gladio, which was the Italian branch of NATO's secret armies. Every country had their own Nazi fascist-run secret army operation through NATO's offices. The most well-known was Operation Gladio. It means the sword in Italian. Now, after World War II, the first elections were in Italy were taking place with the Republican Socialists. So these were people who did the most to sacrifice and fight against fascism before and during World War II. They had a massive amount of appeal in terms of the population. They were about to sweep the elections and come out victorious in the first official democratic election after Mussolini had been killed, and Mussolini was eliminated by Churchill's people because he did know too much. But that had to be subverted and undone. So there was a huge amount. The approach that was taken by J. Edgar Hoover in America was the same approach taken by the CIA, which was managing the Italian political and especially intelligence apparatus after World War II. And here I'm referring to what's known as COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO was something that came to light during the Church Committee hearings in the U.S. Congress in 1975, which was J. Edgar Hoover's operation to subvert any type of anti-imperial civil rights organization like Martin Luther King's organization or Malcolm X or anybody, subvert them with with FBI operatives in order to create internal strife, destroy them from within, assassinate their leaders like they did to Martin Luther King and Fred Hampton as well, and then radicalize them. So take your FBI operatives and promote terrorist activity that would then radicalize them and undermine any of the sane moral leadership that might be there, so that there's nothing coherent, right? And that the population will then hate those anti-imperial agencies. So this was done with the Red Brigades in Italy. So the 1960s, the 70s especially, were known as the years of lead terrorist activity, which was run by these same CIA operatives that collaborated closely with leading unreconstructed fascists that had a vision of a new world order that failed to be achieved in the 1940s, but they always were promised that there would be a new opportunity to get it. And in Japan, the same thing was done there too. And oh, and by the way, the Italian fascists and the mafia, the Sicilian, the Corsican mafia, worked always very, very closely together. That's an important part. And the Jewish mafia, the Meyer Lansky syndicates as well. But they were all part, as Whitney Webb demonstrates in her book on what's it called? She has a new book series called One Nation Under Blackmail, Volume 1 and 2. I highly recommend people read these because it does demonstrate that the mafia was a necessary component of a broader intelligence infrastructure that involved the normalization of drugs, the laundering of drugs, the maintenance of criminal networks in various countries that would always be obedient to the banking elites in London and Wall Street that used intelligence agencies to advance their agenda of suppressing nationalist movements. So the drug component, whether in South America or whether in Europe or beyond, was always needed the mafia to be part of it. You needed organized crime, but you had a hierarchy of obedience within organized crime. And that was largely, like I said, interfacing with the fascists. And this is, again, why when you look at people like Henry Luce, who is the founder of Time Magazine and ran Time Magazine, very closely affiliated with David Lawrence Rockefeller, Nelson Rockefeller throughout the 1940s, 50s, 60s. Henry Luce was part of what turned the USA into this idea of a basket case empire, this new American century. But he was also promoting Mussolini 8 times. Mussolini was Times Man of the Year before the end of World War II. And he continued to promote this as the economic miracle solution for the world, and America especially. The Japanese, same thing. Unfortunately, the entire U.S. bioweapons infrastructure was designed by Hiro Ishii, and the entirety of his Unit 731, which was the biowarfare unit of Japan that carried out destructive, evil, satanic experimentation on POWs, Chinese, captured civilians, Russians throughout World War II. And their talents were so good, they were kind of like doing Mengele stuff, but worse even. And they were all given new jobs in the 1940s, 50s in Fort Detrick, Maryland, helping to organize the strategy for U.S. biowarfare against its own citizens, like the Tuskegee experiments were one aspect of seeing what would be the long-term effects of syphilis on black populations starting in the 1930s all the way up until the late 70s. These were black people who were, treated as subhuman garbage by these social engineers. And they were told you're getting drugs and treatment to help your syphilis, but in fact they were being given syphilis and no treatment just to see how the effects of decay and death would occur, such that it could then be used.
So it sounds exactly like Nazi fascist experimentation. So there's a lineage here of an ideology that continues. It seems like during World War II and before, fascism was out in the open, and then after World War II, fascism went undercover, under different names and under different guises, and a lot of the Nazis were embedded, in these different industries. It seems like they didn't want to let good talent go to waste, and so then they inscripted these different types of experts in the deep state type of system. Intelligence experts, medical experts, rocketry experts, military experts, in a lot of these different countries. I'm in South America, in Brazil. A lot of the Nazis went to Argentina, but just the fascism continued. The families and the power continued. So we get told the story about World War II that the Allies absolutely crushed Germany and Japan, and then we just graciously rebuilt the countries. But if you think of it the other way around, that really Germany and Japan have been two of the best performing economies of the past century, half a century after World War II. So why did the losers do so well, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great paradox, and it's one that people shouldn't let go of, because they became, and we often forget it, or we take it for granted, that all of a sudden those nations that we were working arm in arm with to fight the danger of a new world fascist order run by Nazis and transhumanists in the form of eugenicists, right, who believed in global depopulation like Hitler did, and a purification of the human race. All of a sudden, those people we fought alongside to stop that became our enemies, and all of a sudden our enemies that we fought became our allies. And it happened relatively smoothly. It was just a few years, really, of hardcore trauma, brainwashing, and propaganda to get people to shift gears mentally as far as the zeitgeist and adapt to this new reality. And it's not
in 1984. There were three nation states, and then two of them were fighting and one were allies, and then they just switched every once in a while. So it's just constant war, where the enemy and the ally constantly shifted or switched.
Yes.
Let's talk about the supporters who make Badlands necessary. We've got some great companies, great patriots. I want to play a video here of David Becker. Let's play this, and then we'll talk about it. Just a second.
I can't hear the sound.
Yeah, let me
you have to use share sound too.
Here.
Usually with these sharing videos, there's usually an option that says share sound as well.
Well, let me just read the script here. Yeah, just a second.
Sure.
Yeah, so Mid-Atlantic Business Alliance, are you dreading the arrival of those annual insurance renewals and rate hikes this fall? The high cost of medical insurance is about to get even more daunting, but there's hope on the horizon. Call David Becker at Mid-Atlantic Business Alliance at 609-577-8557 and let us know how you can make a real difference in your healthcare coverage. So that's a great Patriot company. Anything healthcare insurance related, for your employees, if you're self-employed, check that out. And also, we have another
It's a
sponsor
fact.
here.
Mosquitoes transmit malaria, West Nile, and encephalitis. A tick bite can give you Lyme disease or an allergy to red meat. These diseases can make you and your loved ones very sick. Fortunately, Zone Protect stands in the gap for your health. Zone is made with picaridin, which is DEET-free. Zone offers 12-hour protection against mosquitoes, ticks, chiggers, gnats, and no-see-ums. Zone Protect is non-oily, non-greasy. It is safe and effective. Choose Zone Protect's insect repellent made with picaridin. Drop the DEET. Enjoy your outdoor life again. Protect your loved ones. Zone Protects, protecting what matters most. You can buy Zone Protects online. Just use this QR code and save 10% using the promo code BADLANDS.
And we also have 5280 Distilling, run by three friends from Littleton, Colorado. It's a family business. The team at 5280 went to school together, played sports together, worked together in the spirited endeavor. And they use innovative distilling techniques, fresh and organic ingredients, crisp Rocky Mountain water to produce an excellent distilled spirit. And Colorado water is a legit game changer, but it's not just the water. You can taste 5280's passion in every sip. So let's talk about some of these spirits. They're Cackler's whiskey blends. Traditional bourbon and 5280 mellows the spice by combining traditionally aged bourbon with accelerated aged rye bourbons for a refined taste. And this exceptionally smooth bourbon style whiskey hints of sweet honey and light smoke with a very mellow finish. And then there's the Hearthstone Irish whiskey. And in this one, 5280 combines new and old traditions, blending a 3-year-old Irish whiskey with rye whiskeys, bringing forth a surprisingly sweet floral fragrance with hints of toasted oak and vanilla. These incredible products and many others can be shipped to 34 states. So check the website for availability. And they're offering free shipping for purchases over $95. And that's a great deal, considering that these glass bottles are heavy and the Biden supply chain crisis has sent shipping costs to the moon. So you can get 10% off if you order at 5280distilling.com using the promo code BADLANDS. And also Benson Honey Farms is a favorite. Let's play that one. So Benson Honey Farms, you can indulge in the authentic, unpasteurized, 100% natural honey. And this one is a real favorite of a lot of the Badlands hosts. I haven't been able to try it yet, but I know my old co-host Burning Bright said it's one of his favorites. Can't forget the barbecue, unique smoky sauce, tangy yet sweet with their very own honey. It's a really nice thing to add for your cookouts. And if you're craving something sweet, they have honey-infused candies as well. So go to bensonhoneyfarms.com to make an order, and remember to use that rep code BADLANDS. All right, so what about Maria Abramovich? What's her lineage in all of this? I mean, I really got to thank Q and all of those researchers who brought this to the kind of public consciousness, to the point where when Microsoft tried to make her their spokesperson, you had thousands of negative comments and they had to pull the whole campaign. So everyone knows now about spirit cooking and how evil it is and how all the Hollywood people and the Podestas are involved with it. So what's the background with her family, and why is she in that photo with the Rothschild, with the Satan's summoning his legions portrait in the background?
Well, I'm not an expert on all things Abramovich, and what you just said are some clear points that for anybody who is still a little bit, again, confused about the nature of what is the organizing principle of the transatlantic rules-based international order, that's it right there. There is a long continuity of the occult inside of these power structures of empire. The Nazis, and we'll keep it, I guess, themed on this. The Nazis themselves had their own Gnostic occult priesthood that organized the leading figures within the SS, Hermann Goering, Himmler. A lot of these figures were devoted followers of what's known as the Thule Society. This is a secret society that had their own Templar mythos. There was even like 12 nights at one of these crazy castles, and they would do all sorts of sacrificial rituals in order to re-invoke Baal, Baphomet, different variations on the same satanic theme back in before and during World War II. This particular grouping grew out of the Theosophists. So back in the 19th century, you had a grouping of occult leaders around this woman named Helena Blavatsky, but it wasn't just her, who professed to receive messages from beings in Tibet, right? There's new variations of the same thing today with Scientology, and L. Ron Hubbard, who came out of the same sorts of networks with Aleister Crowley back in the 1930s, 40s. L. Ron Hubbard and Crowley were performing, Babylonian sex magic in the desert to try to give birth to Satan. In fact, Crowley thought he was Satan, and they were all trying to give birth to Satan. It's kind of weird. L. Ron Hubbard thought the same thing, and the newer variations of it have usually looked a little bit. They involve some sci-fi UFO elements, like there's Hubbard, who said he was getting these telepathic messages from using his clairvoyance from other dimensions, and you got people who perceive that they get messages from beings living on the rings of Saturn, like the Nine. But they're all variations of the same theosophical occult seance crap that was big in the Psychical Research Bureau of British Intelligence back in the 19th century. That was sort of one of the core, Arthur Conan Doyle, Lord Balfour, who organized things like the Balfour Accords that gave rise to the State of Israel. That was Lord Balfour, ironically, a radical anti-Semite who hated the Jews, who just devoted his life to giving them a homeland that they would all find a pure race and a pure happiness within. No, that was always for geopolitical manipulation. But they were all off-group devoted followers and members of the Bureau for Psychical Research, of which the Theosophists were one branch. In the 1910 period, there was a splitting up within the Theosophical groups. One group was founded by this guy Guido von List. He called it the Sophists, the Sophists. And Guido von List was at the heart of modern Nazism. So the Thule Society emerged out of his organization, which had a particular, again, mystical, occult view of the purity of the Viking ancient race that fought against the Christians in their pagan purity of the folk people of Northern Europe, who fought against the ignorant Christian movements of Charlemagne and others who were just so ignorant and backwards, but they were the pure ones. And they're the ones who destroyed the impure Rurik, so Rurik dynasty of the Russians, working very closely with the Mongols, who, by the way, both the Vikings and the Mongols, especially when you look at things like the Norman invasion of England and the Mongol invasion of the world, both of them were assets for Venetian intelligence and Venetian banking. Venice had.
Wow, you said before it all goes back to that, and I guess even farther back to Babylon. And it's amazing when you talk about the occult, you talk about Baal and Baphomet and stuff. If people just read the Old Testament, they're going to get a lot of context for this battle of good versus evil and some of the ideology, sacrifice and so forth that the Satanists have.
Oh yeah, oh absolutely, yeah. And I mean, it's of course wrapped in a sort of language. You have to do more research about and understand the specifics of the geopolitical terrain that was shaping the world that that was real for those who were writing the books of the Old Testament. But you can get a lot out of it. This should be treated much more seriously as a point of serious research. But the world was shaped by mystery religions, Gnostic cults, pagan rituals, human sacrifice. I mean, the Baal worship involved the ritualistic sacrifice of the firstborn of families, children, as a way to tap into the spirit forces of other dimensions, and there's a whole cosmology around that. But that's how the oligarchy both groomed their own elites, was by creating these rituals that would be dehumanizing as you move through the mysteries. Often proto-LSD drugs were utilized to facilitate the depatterning of the minds and identities of those who would be selected to become the leaders of the oligarchical machinations in the next generation. So how do you do that? Well, drugs help. And there were things like LSD comes from plant blight, like little fungus that grows molds that grows on wheat that has a hallucinogenic property, and certain people said, oh, we can use that to give people a new sense of spirituality. Mescaline also is derived from cactuses, and that's something that's been used in various shamanistic religions. And a lot of this stuff has a natural sort of root you could find in nature, and a lot of the ancient priesthoods and voodoo practices, even of Africa, within South America, the Olmecs, the Aztecs, degenerated at different times into these drug-laced spiritualities that involved a lot of human sacrifice. Anybody who thinks that pre-Columbian, native culture was this pure, perfect, peaceful civilization has a lot to learn. Look, there were mass ritual human sacrifices of the Aztecs. And there was a lot of inter warfare between various kingdoms within the Americas. That being said, there was also a high point of civilization, in some cases much more advanced scientifically and culturally in the Americas, going back to the Olmecs, than we had at the same period in time throughout Europe. So there were very, very high level advances in civilization, which modern anthropologists, Jesuits, especially from the 17th century onward, have been working systematically to destroy, to convince the natives of North and South America that their identity is a pure people untainted by agriculture, technology, and they're just natural the way they are hunting buffalo with low living standards. And they did the same thing to the Africans. There's things like the Yoruba kingdoms. There's so much evidence that before colonialism went into Africa as a suppressive force, you had very advanced civilizations in various kingdoms across the continent of Africa. And I mentioned the Yoruba kingdom of Nigeria. Look at the Google artwork of Yoruba, overlapping today's Mali, Nigeria, on the west coast. This is like 13th century high, but it has a Renaissance quality of naturalistic art that is better in many ways than the best art that was coming out, or sculptures that were coming out of the European Renaissance of the 15th, 16th centuries. What happened to that culture? We have the relics of it, but imperialists went in and annihilated it, just like we did to Libya in 2011 when NATO bombed the hell out of Libya to fight for freedom, right? We bombed them to freedom. And the first thing we destroyed was, one, their infrastructure. So we're destroying the means by which civilians required to have access to clean water or electricity. That's what we bombed. And then we bombed the cultural centers, the museums. We did the same thing to Iraq when we bombed them in Desert Storm, and then we did it again in the wake of 9/11. Why? Because it's easier to control people who have no living memory of their past that could give them dignity and an organizing principle. Destroy that, you're good.
And a sense of pride in their culture, that type of identifying yourself as part of a high culture. Yeah. But instead, you would view yourself as a subservient to the new master class that's ruling over you.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because yes, and at the same time, that new master class can now craft new synthetic identities and new synthetic cultures for you that are useful for geopolitical purposes. So what they did, let's say, for example, India, right? Now, we just had in Canada is a host not just of a bunch of unreconstructed Banderite Nazis from Ukraine, who were all brought in, given safe sanctuary in British Canada after World War II. So a lot of them were groomed here and given protection. Chrystia Freeland, our deputy prime minister and handler of Justin, her grandfather, Mikhail Chomiak, was a leading Nazi who ran the Nazi propaganda newspapers in Ukraine, helping to corral Jews and Poles and Slavs and murder them. And he was given safe sanctuary here, working closely with Bandera and Lebed. But you also have in India, right? Canada is the host of one of the biggest Sikh separatist organizations in the world. Well, who created this? The Khalistanis. Now, a Khalistani leader of the separatist movement, who had their base of operations at the time in Vancouver, was murdered about a week and a half ago. Now, the Canadian government, or our patriotic intelligence agency, CSIS, released a classified report, leaked anonymous information that, in fact, the Indian government of Modi directly carried out the kill of this person in Canada. Now, this has justified a total breakdown of all Canada-Indian relations, right? We can't get a visa to travel to India anymore. Like, we're blaming India with no evidence that they just carried out a murder of a Canadian citizen. None of it's true. This is, again, but what are the Khalistanis? These Sikh, and this is not all Sikhs. This is a small sub-minority of Sikhs who are followers of this. They want Punjab, the province of Punjab, to become its own separate, ethnically pure country, right? Expelled of all Muslims, of Hindus, and only have ethnically pure Sikhs. Where did this ideology for a separatist Punjab that they say is called Pakistan come from? It came from British intelligence. It was a scholar at Oxford in the 1880s who innovated this idea. Actually, it was earlier in the 1850s, in the 1880s. Yeah, in the wake. Sorry, no, 1860. In the wake of one of the biggest anti-British revolts that involved both Sikhs and Muslims and Hindus together, saying no more British exploitation. The British had been raping India as the crown jewel since the late 1780s. And they organized controlled famine, depopulation. It was they took India from being the second most powerful economy in the world in the 1790s. They had the most advanced textiles, most advanced engineering capabilities. It was India, right behind China at that time. And they consciously destroyed it so that all India was allowed to do was produce opium that would then be fed to China to subdue and keep China down, all under British East India control. The textile manufacturers had their hands cut off if they had skills at weaving. You had your hands cut off so that only the British could have the monopoly over textiles, right? And India would remain a raw materials exporter. And instead, India had their museums, their shrines, their historical memories destroyed by the invaders, the British. And instead, the British promoted this very crystallized caste system, saying only the poor people are the Brahmins. And the Brahmins became the enforcers of the British control over India. So that only needed to have 10,000 British troops in India managing like 400 million people because they had a local control system. Now, part of Khalistan, so Khalistan was the solution from these Oxford social engineers saying, okay, we can break up this resistance movement by getting each of the groupings to have their own view of their own country. That's where Pakistan came out of when Lord Mountbatten in 1945-46, who was the viceroy of India. He's the person who, a rampant pedophile Satanist who groomed Prince Philip and now King Charles, that Louis Mountbatten, who also brought in the UFO PSYOP. That was also Louis Mountbatten who commissioned the first government-sponsored UFO research team, but that's a side note. In 1946, he carved out. He said, "Okay, we're going to give you now local control, India. We'll leave after World War II, but give us 1 year." And in that year, they basically said, "Okay, we're going to carve out this region that's today's Pakistan, and all of the Muslims that are distributed across India, we're going to put them all there." Some Muslims were indoctrinated and believed that, yeah, this is our ordained divine place to have our homeland for the Muslims, nobody else. And it became a bloodbath. Millions died in axe murders and shit cultivated by the British. They said the same thing for the Sikhs. They said, okay, we're going to have this divine land of Punjab, and we'll make an ethno-nationalist identity for the Sikhs with their own deep history story going back hundreds or thousands of years, and that became the basis of a massive amount of terrorism. Thousands of people have been killed by this operation, and of course, and also drug money. So there were this operation of the Khalistanis, which again emerged out of Oxford, an Oxford thinker. This idea that this homeland is ours was needed money, and so part of the money came, the funding for it, which
so if Pakistan and Bangladesh and India were all a unified country and they were allowed to have a national identity, that would make them much more powerful to be able to be a military power against the other nation states, especially the British.
Yeah, and it gets you out of this idea that to be a nation you need to have some sort of an ethnically pure thing, which is how the Nazis, all of the fascist organizations that have been groomed by British imperial intrigue, were all like sort of stuck on this idea that the nation is the purity of your genetic. It's a blood and soil. It becomes a blood and soil cult. That's why Lord Balfour was putting so much effort into the crafting of this carved out state in Palestine that would become this Jewish, ethnically pure Jewish state, whereby you won't even be legally allowed to marry a non-Jew if you lived in Israel, which is still unfortunately the case today. You can't. So it's all based on this racial purification, eugenics, pseudoscience, and they did that with every grouping. That's how they want to have the world, is like a mosaic of. It's a divided mosaic. They don't like the idea of the American melting pot idea. You know, like if you look at the Statue of Liberty, that America is based on a nation of immigration, right? Like we're all from Europe in a sense. If you're a white person in America, it's because you immigrated to America. You're not a Native American per se, but even a Native American, there's no such thing as a pure Native American race. That's another thing that has been promoted falsely by British social engineers, often with their American counterparts in the Bureau of Ethnology or the Smithsonian Institute going back to the 19th century, is that there's such a thing as this pure First Nations people. But it's like, what is a First Nation? These are people who came in from China in some cases. Look at the Inuits of the North. There's definitely Mongolian concepts. If there's Olmecs, black races that came in from Africa. There's people. It's not like all of the blacks in North America came in through the slave trade. A lot of them were already there because the Olmecs, and you could go look at these ancient monuments from 1000 BC of these giant black, very clearly black African figures in South America that had, incredibly advanced, intricate civilizations. So you had the whole world is much different. Now, the idea of a melting pot. And I say this just quickly because if you go to a lot of the reservations in Canada, you have to prove that you're ethnically pure Native by a factor of something like 80%, and then you're allowed to live on the reservation. But if you're less than 80% like natural born Native blood, then you're not allowed to live on the reservation. You're only allowed to live. It's weird. So they're doing this again, you see. Right.
Under the guise of helping the poor. The poor, persecuted class of people.
Yeah, it's always the British Empire will always help a small group. They'll build a victim identity in that small group that they wish to use, in order for that small group to become weaponizable against a rival that the British ultimately really want to destroy. But they're happy to ultimately destroy that small group that they're using. So they don't care about the victimized Taiwanese who have their own new Taiwanese identity, which is anti-Chinese, that they've cultivated in the last 25 years. There's no such thing as a Taiwanese natural identity, which is distinct from mainland China, unless you're a native Taiwanese person who was there before Chiang Kai-shek left China in the 1940s. If then you might be a native person who actually could have some claim on that. But even there, you probably came from another broader civilization and built colonies, hundreds or thousands of years ago. So that's what they're doing now. But do you think that the U.S. military-industrial complex cares about the Taiwanese people's independence and democracy? Not at all. They're happy to use them the way they've used the Ukrainians as a battering ram in a war against Russia or China, but ultimately they're more than happy if they're wiped off the map in the crossfire of a nuclear exchange. They're perfectly happy with that. Same thing for the Japanese fascists.
Now that you mentioned nuclear exchange, you sent me an interesting quote. Someone claiming that the Russians might use nuclear weapons again, as if they used them in the past. That was actually the United States who used them. So what is this type of language? Is this just one stupid person who made a faux pas, or is this like a rewriting of history to make the Soviets or the Russians the nuclear aggressors?
Well, this is the thing, right? It's all the rewriting of history. And that person that I sent you who was giving this speech was Ursula von der Leyen, who's the president of the European Commission, who gave a speech describing in a heartfelt way how moved she was from the G7 that she was participating in Japan, in Hiroshima, describing the horrors of the murder of these innocent people by nuclear terror, nuclear bombs that struck and defeated Japan. And in the same breath, she never mentions the United States even one time. In the same breath, describing the horrors of nuclear bombing of Japan and Hiroshima and Nagasaki, she then says, and that's why we must never let the Russians terrorize us with nuclear weapons ever again. It's like, wait a minute. The nuclear weapons were only used once. It was by the United States against the wishes of the better faction of the U.S. military, like Douglas MacArthur, who said he would never have permitted this, and he was fighting against it because it was understood Japan was defeated by 1945. All that you had to do was cut the supply lines and wait till they gave up. It would just require a bit of patience. So the dropping of the nuclear bombs was done purely as an Anglo-American assertion of hegemony, as a message to other countries of the world that the time had come to submit national sovereignty to an Anglo-American New World Order of dominance after the Nazi machine had been put down. And if Franklin Roosevelt had been alive, he would never have let it happen. This was done specifically by Harry Truman, who ushered in the CIA. He's the one who purged the U.S. intelligence of its patriots when he disbanded the OSS and made sure that anybody who had a sense of Wall Street support for fascism and this entire deep state would not have a job in the new. They would not be getting security clearance. Your career would be ruined. You would be labeled a red commie traitor, which happened to countless people in academia and government and military and in politics. Henry Wallace was a leading person who was purged and called a red commie. So was Paul Robeson, his ally. And so, yeah, they created the CIA based on a British-directed form of black operations, psychological warfare, assassinations, really dirty operations, and working with Nazis. They did the same thing with the UK-USA Signals Agreement, the creation of the Five Eyes, using the NSA as a British hand in American intelligence that would coordinate with GCHQ, with MI6, with the CIA in America, with RCMP operations within Canada, and we had our own CSA in Canada that then managed the control of Nazi-directed terrorist outfits, not terrorist cells. Like I mentioned, the Red Brigades, but you also had the Weather Underground. You had the FLQ. You had many others that were nominally Marxist-Leninist terrorists of mostly young, stupid people on drugs and super sexed out of their eyeballs. That were then used. But if you look behind the scenes, and books have been written on this, my wife has written a book on this, these were not run by the Kremlin or Beijing. These were run by the same Nazis and fascists and Allen Dulles that wanted to create a climate of terror, right? So you have foreign intelligence agencies, just like they do today, where the FBI have their own people either infiltrating freedom groups, right, or just creating racist neo-Nazi freedom groups, nominally freedom groups. Right?
Let's just say it out loud: the school shootings. I mean, that is a type of terrorism that has been subjected to us domestically, and people always, the common kind of ignorant person in America assumes that it was just some random crazed teenager that has done this, and yet there's usually a psychiatrist handler connected. There's usually intelligence assets close to that person. Usually that person was already on the radar, already had a relationship with intelligence agents. So, that is something that's now this kind of new truth movement that's emerged has just come to terms with and shared their research about how school shootings have been a type of domestic terrorism from our own government.
On that point, and you're totally right. I dare anybody to try to find an authentically, naturally arising shooting, either in a school, in a public setting, or even an act of terror that's just naturally arising with no internal coordination or anything by intelligence agencies or high-level psychiatry.
And no cover-up afterwards.
And no cover-up, yeah. Try to find that. I don't even believe that these things are really, maybe once in a while, maybe once in a blue moon, but this is not really a phenomenon that's natural at all. And Fordham University conducted a study back in 2013. Very hard to find the original study. It's almost been wiped of the internet, from the internet now. But in it, they evaluated every single case. I think something like 240 known cases of terrorist incidences that were intervened upon, stopped by the FBI, only from 9/11 to the present. And they said they couldn't find a single case where there wasn't either one or more FBI informants within, directly coordinating, providing blueprints, plans, other things. All of these things were creations. And it's the same reason, the same logic behind why these terrorist agencies, at the time, they were today it's like Islamic terrorism. That was the new narrative after the Soviet Union melted down in 1992. They're like, well, we need some enemy to unite the people and manipulate them around, because we used to have this very convenient thing called Russia and communism, but now we won, right? Communism was disintegrating. So now we need a new threat to, and before that we had
war on terror.
Yeah, the war on terror, that became the thing. But before that, it was commies and Kremlin-run Manchurian candidates and things like that. That was our big enemy. And the whole time, when you scratch any of the stories of the Weather Underground bomb-making operation, the terrorism in Quebec, the terrorism across Europe, you'll always find the hand, not of the Kremlin or Beijing, but always of Anglo-American intelligence. Always. Because they want to create a climate of fear so that we would, and they did that in South America too, right? So that every time you had a nationalist leader, whether it was a Martin Luther King or a Bobby Kennedy or a Salvador Allende, who was standing up against United Fruit, against the IMF, against the World Bank, and trying to nationalize different aspects of the privatized economy in opposition to the mafia-run operations. This is what Fidel Castro was up against too. When he came into Cuba was totally owned by United Fruit, which was an intelligence agency operation, and Mayor Lansky and organized crime had like a casino monopoly over Cuba. That was totally 100% owned by Wall Street, London, the mafia, and United Fruit. And that's what he kicked out. That's why they had something like 300 different assassination attempts on Castro. I don't know how the hell he survived. But they did the same thing to Allende. When they killed Allende under Kissinger and they put in Pinochet, Pinochet was being advised by unreconstructed Nazis who were brought into Chile via the rat line after World War II. They were all over Argentina as well. That's what Pope Francis was working with when he was still just the head of the Jesuit operations of Latin America in the 1970s. He was working with the right-wing fascist regime there. I'm forgetting the name. That was being advised by Barbie, what's the name? Klaus Barbie, whatever, the high-level Nazi SS operative who was advising fascist regimes across South America, and to kill resistance fighters, and including priests who were working with the peasants in fighting these different organized drug crime syndicates who were working with Wall Street. The early, Pope Francis was working to call out and help kill and torture a lot of these people. Now
we know why Pope Francis rose to the top of that power structure, because that same intelligence kind of lineage that you described, the Anglo-American goes back to the Venetian goes back to the Babylonian, and of course the Catholic Church and the Jesuits are part of that. The Jesuits are an intelligence apparatus. People think that they're just really smart priests who really like starting universities or something like that. We've got 3 minutes left. I have a big question that you're going to have to really condense. But we talked about nuclear war, and it seems like Russia's basically already won. We talked last week on my show, Sean Morgan Report, about how the famous journalist who researched the real Nord Stream 2 terror attack is now saying he's saying that basically there's no more war in Ukraine, that the Ukrainian fighters will not do an offensive, there'll be a mutiny, and we're just dumping money into a lost cause. So if that's the case, it seems like the deep state, NATO, the only thing they have left is a first strike against Russia. So any comment on that before we wrap up, and maybe we can just lead that into next week?
Yeah, maybe we'll definitely unpack that more next week, but that's a fear I have as well, that all of the scenarios that they had planned are not working out the way that they were supposed to. And the oligarchy, I know for a fact they really don't want to do nuclear war. That's like a lot. But it's not that they're not willing to. They're willing to, but they would really prefer to get the big mass culling of the species and world government under smoother, safer methods for them. Because by unleashing that beast of nuclear war, there is a lot of uncertainty. You don't control the parameters, and you destroy a lot of the things that you want to try to dominate in the new system, including potentially yourself. There's only so many. Yeah. The bunkers only keep you so safe, you know.
And if they want a technocracy, I mean, there's just a few different types of new technologies that are controlled by a few locations and factories and corporations that if you get rid of them, it sets you back 50 years.
It's not. Yeah, they would rather not do it. But again, I am concerned that a desperate, wounded animal is not a safer animal to be around, and a lot of their dirty games are becoming more understood. You know, the mask is off. People are seeing what this thing is much more clearly than I think ever before. And here I'm speaking about American people, patriots across the transatlantic, who are able to see the evil, the Satanist, the satanic nature of this thing more than they ever have in human history. And internationally, you know, like those leaders from Eurasia, from Iran, from China, from India, from Russia, from across Africa, you know, are looking at this thing saying, okay, we know what this is. And they're doing there's a decent fight across that involves collaboration amongst various cultures to do battle with this thing in defense of their people, which is, again, gives me hope, a lot of hope, that I've never seen this before. But it makes it dangerous. So yeah, maybe we could take this apart next week.
It's a big subject. It's the end game, you know, and they're wargaming this out themselves. And so we got to figure this out, because it could involve our nations and our people and our families. So we'll talk about that next week. There's links below. You can check out Matt and his work and his writings and his documentaries. You can get my breaking news updates at SeanMorganReport.com. God bless all you patriots. We'll see you next time.